At the outset, I do want to commend the postmasters and postmistresses for the wonderful job that they have done in providing the social and economic hubs in these communities. And I do think it is grossly unfair in the way that language that's used. Sometimes they have the responsibility of the whole parish or the whole area, and people looking to them in a way that they expect them to keep their post office open, and I think there's a gross unfairness about that. But I do want to propose our own amendment to tonight's motion, which seeks to remove a farcical paragraph stating that pre-2011 post office closures were acceptable and by the book. And I was astounded to hear Deputy Dooley, when he was asked on RTE1 about Fianna Fáil closing all the post offices, to say, well, that was okay, it wasn't planned. That's the exact words that he used, it wasn't planned, which is absolutely astounding, I think. Has Fianna Fáil gone back to any of those communities which had a post office act and asked them if they now accept that that was necessary? It's ridiculous to state that previous closures of post offices were different or somehow justified. This PMB says that previous closures were based on population. This is simply not factual. The population living in the countryside grew from roughly 2.34 million in 1986 to 3.36 million in 2011, an increase of 30%. The national figure for this period was 20%. Ireland has a high rural-based population. Rural dwellers make up 42% of the population, compared to an average 27% in the EU and 12% in Britain. Fianna Fáil closed 732 post offices when last in government. This is nearly one for every week. This is a new strategy of Fianna Fáil to try and convince people that all was well before the election in 2011. They are even claiming that the health waiting lists were in a much better condition prior to 2011. The closures overseen by the last Fianna Fáil government were as much of an attack on rural Ireland as the current closures. At least have the honesty to admit that it was wrong then and it's wrong now. Communities that are left without post office service in this current closure or 10 years ago are not as easily fooled as you think. Fianna Fáil closed post offices to save money because they bailed out the banks. Simple, ordinary people paid with higher taxes and huge cuts in services. The post offices were also hit. We see those very same banks now. The three major banks made a profit of 2.6 billion, I think it was last year, and they don't even have to pay any tax on it. So when we talk about decisions that are being made around finances and investment that needs to be made in rural Ireland, we could address that for a start to ensure that the banks pay their fair share of tax. My own colleague and our own colleague, Pearse Doherty, has shown how this could be done and has to be done. We see charitable status for the vulture funds. Again, millions going down the drain. So I don't accept it, Minister, when you say that it's about the allocation of resources. It's about choices, and it's about choices that the different governments have made and that the government is making now in terms of, do we look after our vulnerable populations, or do we continue to turn our backs on rural Ireland? We're now looking at up to 159 post offices across the state being closed. Once the post office goes, what else will be left in the main street or many of our towns and villages? You see, it's just much more than the post office. This is symptomatic of the way that rural Ireland has been treated. If a post office can disappear from a community, then the same threat hangs over so many of our other services, such as schools and clinics. When I drive down here from Dublin every week, I pass through villages like Bellacorrick, who once had a vibrant post office, pub, shop and all of that, to completely closed villages such as that now. The consensus is that more services are needed in post offices. Current closures are a slap in the face of those working hard to come up with solutions. And I know, Minister, what you're saying, and we all accept the practicalities and the realities, but I do think it was very insulting to say to people like the parishes that I come from, in the parish of Ballycroy, that I was reared in, to say, well, to be dismissive in the sense that, well, people now choose to go to Aldi and Lidl. I don't think that was right. I really don't think it was. Yeah.
Read the record.
You referred to, I heard you on Midwest Radio, you referred to Aldi and Lidl, and it's almost like...
Read the record.
You see, well, I would just tell you my interpretation of it. It's almost like that it's people's choice that they don't want a post office, and that certainly isn't my experience in rural Ireland. And that's why I believe that the government is not listening to those communities who are prepared to come up with their own solutions to keep their post office open. I know that there are many areas where people have offered to run the post office or have presented viable options for co-location. And this government, as usual, presents rural Ireland with a black and white decision to be taken. And I would appeal to you at this stage, Minister, as well, in terms of the appeal processes, to have the appeals process, to have a look at these areas and to see what can be done, and to work with the people and work with the communities. The approach to measuring 500 people living within the catchment area of a post office is, I believe, entirely flawed. Ask anybody living in these areas and they'll tell you of the dispersed nature of houses. Many of these villages have up to 600 and 700 people living in the outskirts, so it doesn't take into account the true population. As a member of the Finance Committee, I have attended many sessions examining the viability of the public banking sector in Ireland, and there has been successful models operating, as you know, in New Zealand, such as the Kiwi Bank, and I was in Germany last week to examine the Sparkassen model of public banking as well. So decisions to close the post offices mean that such a system would never have a chance to be tried out. I just believe, and I really do take it, Minister, when you say this has been landed on your desk, but this government has been in place for 11 years, and we have had, and you rightly say, the Fianna Fáil government coming through the boom and all that, when there could have been, and there was room there for investment and creative thinking and all of that, to offer extra and enhanced services within the post offices. I do think we need to just re-look at this. The final recommendations of the Kerr report have not been implemented yet. The government can act promptly to close the post offices. So it really tells us in rural Ireland that this government, the same as all of the other governments before that, is turning its back on rural Ireland, because it's extremely difficult to explain to pensioners and elderly people, people who don't have transport, their own household transport, and you know that the public transport system isn't there, and you know the affordability in terms of the cost that it will take for people to go to hire a taxi, to go to the post office, as well as the whole social interaction that people have within post offices. I do believe that a much better job could have been done as well in terms of advertising the services that are available within post offices, and I think it's something that needs to be looked at, not spending huge money in it even. You know, it could be as simple as putting it on the church bulletins to remind people of the services that are available through their post offices. And I would encourage everybody to continue to use their post offices in every way that all of us can. So, Minister, I would really ask you to look at this, look at the appeals process in the areas that post offices need to be left, because it's much more than a post office to us. Thank you.